All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the second Reflection Cast, day 2 of our wonderful conference of Reopening America's Schools, hosted by the Impact Leading and Learning Group. Just an invigorating day, a second invigorating day. I think I'm just now starting to recognize how long of a day it was, because it was just from one session to the next, starting early this morning, going all the way until just 30 minutes ago. It's been back-to-back, just brilliance, back-to-back brilliance, and I'm really excited. We have a little bit of an extra added bonus today. So in addition to being joined by Stephen and Janice, we also have Amy Jablonski and Stephanie Height joining us, two of the presenters from to talk. We're very excited to have you both with us today. I personally just loved both of your sessions, and I'm sure everyone else did too, from all of the engagement that we saw in the chat. And I'm excited to continue the conversation. So before I hand it off to Stephen and Janice, I just want to remind you, if you're watching live, please go ahead and ask your questions in the chat, whether you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube. If you put them into the comments, we'll see them and we'll be able to discuss them. Obviously, a chance to continue the conversation with two of our wonderful presenters, which is great, but not limited to their sessions. Really, if you want to talk about anything that happened, from Billy Snow to Zaretta Hammond to Jennifer Abrams, and all the wonderful presenters, we're excited to have you join us. And I hear now there's no sound. So if you can hear us, let us know, to make sure that this isn't a universal problem. Maybe
we can hear each other.
We can hear each other, so we're going to continue operating as though we can. But if you're able to hear us, it would be great to hear. Oh, wonderful! All right, thanks, Janet.
Thanks, Janet.
Glad to have you joining us, and we're excited to kick it off. So, Stephen and Janice, so I sort of talked about what I got from this, but I'd love to hear your impressions here on day 2 and some thoughts about today's presenters.
Oh.
Wow. That's a big question. I should have come prepared.
Oh, you're prepared.
Yeah, I know. I let me just start off with, I think Billy, having him really start off by helping us, reminding us of the importance of opening up the conversation about equity. And really flipping the conversation to thinking about creating those equity teams and allowing those teams to have that ongoing dialogue about equity, I think was just a great start, because really I think that's what we're hitting the face with right now, is the inequity that's taken place as a result. It's just exposed that even more. So what a foundational start for us to move into. And then of course, just having Stephanie really talk about, the collective efficacy piece. So just the value that brings in the structures and processes that we need to set up so that we get that collective efficacy. And then moving into Amy and the all means all, powerful piece about all means all. To me, people ask, you must be exhausted from this day. My rear end is exhausted, but my brain is just super. I want to have more and more conversations that took place today. I could go on. I'm just invigorated by today. I wish I could say something more intelligent other than I'm just incredibly just thrilled by what I learned and what I gleaned from our presenters today. So for me, it's just a big thank you to them and what I was able to walk away with.
Yeah. I think our hearts are just full of the generosity and kindness, right? We made a call. We set out a charge to say to friends and colleagues, hey, will you help us help educators and make something really special happen? Because we know that the frontline workers are hurting, and we acknowledge that, and those health care workers. But Stephen and I at Impact Learning and Leading Group, our whole team just really felt like this is just really an unprecedented time. And I know we've had pandemics before. So somebody said, well, it's not unprecedented, but shutting down school, we didn't get a chance to even say goodbye to our students sometimes. Mm-hmm. And what we're asking for people to do is really challenging, and we have our own trauma and things that are happening. And so we were really hopeful that some of our friends and other colleagues would, want to help do that. So when we came up with this Reopening America's Schools, Reimagine K-12 education, Seize the Opportunity, it was all about empowering and uplifting people and getting them inspired again. And TJ, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. So the presenters answered the call. People were like, we're going to give of our time. It's really great. And I've been saying this, it's our Live AIDS concert for educators. And if you're not old enough, look it up. Look at We Are the World. But TJ, really, you hit our heart. At Impact Learning and Leading Group, we're all about hard work. And you said that you were inspired yesterday and you were empowered today. And that's all we need. We're not tired. Now I feel invigorated again, because that was our whole goal. Because people like Stephanie and Amy and Zaretta Hammond and Dr. Billy Snow, and we had Dr. Teresa Wrench this afternoon close us out, Jennifer Abrams. It was a great day. I did have a couple quotes pop out. IQ is not equated to race. Hello, right? 90% of students in the world are not in school right now.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's maybe not a completely unprecedented moment, but it's certainly an unusual moment, and it's an opportunity, I think, to quote Jennifer, it's an opportunity for us all to perhaps suspend certainty a little bit, right? To really say, okay, I loved what she said, hold on to your ideas just lightly. And I think that that's such a great opportunity, because it sort of is juxtaposed up against something that, Amy, you actually quoted in your session, and Billy Snow quoted in his session earlier in the morning, the W. Edwards Deming quote, "Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets." And that, we're at a point now where that system design that is so deeply entrenched in our nation's schools has been kind of knocked to the ground, right? And there's so much uncertainty going forward. We have an opportunity to step into that uncertainty and to really evaluate the ways in which we can maybe let go of some of those old systems, some of those old practices that we know are marginalizing and are exclusionary, and really start to rethink new systems that can be designed to achieve the constructs, not just the measures that we really want to achieve. So Amy and Steph, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, or Stephen, you have something to say about it?
Yeah, let me just add this piece now that I've thought about it, because now I've had time to just process after that question for a second. What today did is it created a new grounding. So our call is that we wanted people to have kind of an opportunity to reset and really think intentionally about what do we want to make sure we do well and right when we reopen. And I think today really provided that foundation that we need to rebuild and reopen with. And not to forget the things that we heard today as part of our foundational piece.
Yeah.
All the other noise and stuff will take place, and all those systems and processes will come into place. But what was provided today was, here are the things you need to stand on in order to do all that other stuff well and right. So
absolutely, yeah. Amy, Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on? I mean, we've been sort of rambling. Anything on what we've talked about, or anything else from the day?
Sure, Amy, you want to go first, or you want me to take it?
Because you know what, you're talking right now. Why don't you go first? I'll follow for you.
I tried to dive into as many of the sessions today as I could, and I think what really stood out for me was this issue of equity being addressed in all sorts of different ways. And I think one of the things I might have wanted to say, but probably didn't say during my session, is that what we're noticing is that, of course, we've all pointed out that during this crisis, the inequities that have always been present in our system are now even more apparent, right? It's a big, huge spotlight on them. As we're going out and kind of talking to folks about how we're addressing those inequities, I've particularly been reaching out to the folks that have been really focused on building collective efficacy for a lot of years now, and they're now harnessing that in a big way during this crisis, and hearing these amazing stories of we have students who have laptops because we're a one-to-one school, but they're in areas where there's no bandwidth or there's no internet. So they're driving buses with hotspots into rural areas so that students can get online. Or we've got students with food insecurity. And so within days, they're setting up, places where they can be distributing food and getting food to families. Story after story after story. And it's not perfect by any means. There's still an awful lot we can do. But what it says to me is that we've often thought about confronting inequity as this big, hard problem that's going to take us a long time to address. It's going to be a slow going. And guess what? 2 months, look at what we've done, right? People have been pulling together, working together, building on the efficacy that they've got. And they're saying we can't let this happen to our kids. And they're addressing inequities in, rapid time. And so how do we learn from that? And say, we're just not going to settle for it anymore. We just don't want to say that this is a long-term problem that's going to take forever to solve. We can do it in a day. We have, let's do it.
Yeah, and I think your example that you're pointing out makes me think about how much our schools are such a community-based experience. Mm-hmm. That communities really do see and rely on schools to provide so much more than an academic experience. I know Holly that was presenting with me talked so much about how some of the safest places kids are in schools. They feel welcome, there's stability, there's predictability there. And then moving that away from our students at this point in time and our staff, that next level of trauma of something that you can count on being moved away. And I have also been extremely impressed with, how much, how quickly a place like a school system, forget about the many that we have out there, can change the way they do business with all of the levels that are there. And then we can use this as a strength opportunity as we do go into schools to say, okay, so what did we learn and how can we build upon the successes? What do we still need to have our gaps closed? We know that there are inequities out there. So what do we need to build coming in to begin going ahead and kind of plugging those up as we reopen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think you're seeing now more than ever the reality of the fact that schools, and this is actually, both of you said this, and the word just stuck in my head from both of your sessions today, but the schools are not just in the business of instruction, but also in the business of invitation. And that really what we do as educators, regardless of how we plug into the school system, is an act of inviting others into a collective, curious sort of set of actions. And those things are a lot of different things. And you're really getting to some of the amazing things that schools do. At CIBI, we work with schools all over the world, and it's been amazing to see how quickly and adaptive they've been at some of these really crucial services that may not be at the top of mind when you think about what a school does, but really what they are is the center of their communities. And Janice, you've said this a couple times now that we're acting in gratitude towards the people who are literally risking their lives during this time, the first responders who are addressing the medical crisis in our country and around the world. But really, if it weren't for these schools, I know in Houston where I live, if it weren't for the school district, it's not just the kids, there are entire families who wouldn't be eating right now if it weren't for them. Yeah, and that is an engagement with the community that we've never seen in schools before. So why would we want to go back to the way things were when we could go forward through this and find new opportunities to continue that conversation?
And I think oh, go ahead, Stephen.
Well, go ahead, Amy. I'll chime in after.
Yeah,
Just thinking about an opportunity to redefine some of the big terms that we rely on, like I'll use like engagement, right? Now, how can we reimagine what engagement looks like because we're seeing it in a different way? Right? Even things, and I know our friends and colleagues and researchers with Attendance Works is, really thinking through that component, especially since so many people use student chronic absenteeism as a measure in their ESSA plans. And but what does that look like now? And how can we match it to the students who are actually being served, and redefining it and knowing that we can still get great outcomes? This relief of standardized testing being, put to the side, like, all right, now we can really get at these other concepts that sometimes have gotten forgotten because of some of the standardization that has come about over time.
Yeah. Well, and TJ, it's more that we shouldn't go back to. We know better now to go back to the way things were.
yeah.
And we have this opportunity to actually just now take a minute, stop, and I think the acronym today was WAIT. Just take a minute and just pause and think about what is most critical, most crucial, what does the evidence say about what works, and implement those things well and right. We know the power of collective efficacy. And Steph talked a lot about that. There's a great deal of research around it. If we're not going back and embracing that and resetting our structures and processes to set that up well and right, we've missed it.
Yeah, and I'd love actually, Steph, for your thoughts on this, because so at Sydney we spend a lot of time engaging schools in building that collective efficacy. And I think about the efficacy part of the expression a lot. And I thought less about the word collective and how that involves people, as Janice keeps reminding us, the human factor, but not just, one or two, but an entire community of people, and making that collection of people really efficacious. The first word in that phrase often gets sort of just skipped over, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I think it's deceptively simple, right? We say, well, just if we all work together, things are going to be great. But it's important to remember that collective efficacy is about the belief of the group. And the belief of the group and the will of that group can really be diminished or undermined when things get tough. And so when we talk about these success stories during the pandemic, I think we should peel back and say, well, why were these groups successful? What made them resilient? What made them able to respond and serve their students? And I think everywhere that you look, we see some things like a flattened hierarchy, right? Let's let the teachers who know the kids best make the decisions in the moment, and let's not, belabor this. Let's give them the power to do those types of things, right? So we've got empowered teachers, empowered teachers there, right? And we've got, it's a bizarre way of working, but if we were collaborative in our teams before, we're going to be collaborative in our teams now virtually. And I actually had a superintendent say that to me. She said, the teams were in place. They worked really well together. They're just doing it online now. And so it's all about kind of capitalizing on those features that really ensure that we've got that collective belief. We know we can do this together. And when that's firmly in place, then the efficacy follows, right? So we have those mastery experiences, right? I'll bet the first day that that schools got food to the kids, they probably said, we've got this, we can do this. And then that now leads to the next success and the next success. What I get concerned about are places where they haven't felt those successes. They're feeling frustrated or they're feeling diminished. And I would hope that they could look to their colleagues, right, and say, okay, just because we didn't get it right from this moment doesn't mean we can't forge ahead and start building that collective efficacy now. Let's take a look at the lenses that we need to look through. Do we have empowered teachers? Do we know what everybody's doing? Do we have those structures in place? What can we learn so that we don't slip back? My biggest fear is that we'll say, oh, the pandemic's over. Thank goodness we can go back to the way it was. And we all know that we've got great evidence that the way it was didn't serve us. And so what can we take forward, and let's really push hard to not let the rubber band snap back to where it was before.
Yeah, I want to before we go on, I just want to tell the dozens of people who are watching us, please join this conversation. We need your collective voice.
Thank you. Yeah.
So if you have questions, go ahead and ask. Yeah,
ask those questions. Stephanie, you really, something that with at Impact Learning and Leading Group, one of the things we advocate with the design of an implementation team is have your implementer's voice heard. And so what I heard you say there that just really resounded with me was that flattened hierarchy has really brought those voices in. And a friend of ours and colleague, Dr. Keith Myatt, says, don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. And let's learn from that and let's keep those voices present. Because if we don't have our practitioners involved in the implementation of change, we can't foresee the problem. They know what the barrier is going to be, right? And they can get those feedback loops so that we can address them and work through those problems. And when we design something from that hierarchy and we don't include those voices in the design, we come across those barriers anyway, and we have a really hard time solving them. So that collective effort that you described, and it was a light bulb for me, because the implementers are involved, right? We want to have the actual practitioner's voice in the implementation that they're rolling out.
And if we can really go into next year, really, because you're right, Steph, not everyone's going to be successful, not everyone will be successful, but I like to say is what we know today doesn't necessarily make yesterday wrong. If we take this opportunity and learn from it, it makes tomorrow better.
Yeah, and I want to bring up a couple of
great.
that Michelle has, and she's talking actually about something that I think is central to maker principles and design thinking, and Zoretta's comment about hiding the vegetables, but getting that initial lift, that initial cognitive lift to happen is often the greatest challenge. Once they've done that first lift, then they start to be okay with that productive struggle. And that's not just true. My background is in PD, and I've always been a little bit resistant to the idea of adult learning versus student learning, because I just think, I am just an older child. So, I don't like to struggle, but once I start to have that productive struggle, I really do really enjoy the dopamine hit that comes from that. But she's talking about agency and how we can accelerate this collective thinking. So what thoughts do you guys have about this?
Well, thinking about just what all's being said with, this comment here from Michelle plus what was said, and pulling back a little bit on the presentation, we talked about the generation of students that we have, and how much that they are part of so much of wanting to solve community, world, global issues we have. And so as we're thinking of a redesign or an opportunity, it's about how can we have them engage in what they are so strong at to be able to go ahead and continue for themselves to push the envelope. And we're in this world right now where, Paulo Freire says it's the banking, right? The banking system where we're not dumping information in, but we're in this place so much now where the teacher can really step back, which takes some, especially how we think of the generations as we went through and what that means to take a step back and have the students be the center of the classroom and of the experience. And what they're going to continue to show us as this generation is how powerful they are. They are digging in and asking hard questions that we can use their stamina to keep moving on almost on their coattails. And the fact that we've all experiencing a pandemic together makes that we can put that at the center of our conversations and use that, if we think about culturally sustaining pedagogy, around the center and having really a common experience, but now all these different lenses of what that different experience is within the same pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next thing is actually a reference to something that you said, Amy, so I'm going to ask Stephanie to respond to it. But, taking the name off, getting a good pulse on what's really needed. the North Star that Anne mentioned. But the pulse and the beat can come from outside instead of having to come from inside. So what do you think about that?
I would hope that we're starting to think about the community as something much bigger than just the school, right? I mean, I think that's really the key. And I think what all the presenters today were talking about was getting those voices to come together. In my work, we've always believed that the more diverse the group is that's working and planning for kids, the more we're going to get better ideas and we can do the work in a deeper, more meaningful way. I wanted to say one thing about that last comment. I think the question was, how can we accelerate? And I always get a little nervous when I hear the word accelerate, because I think actually what educators need right now is the gift of time. They need a little time to take a breath. They need time to reflect on what just happened. These last couple of months have just been fast and furious for everybody. And they need time to come together and think about what worked. What were we able to do that we never imagined we could do before? What kinds of learning we were able to offer our kids in these really weird circumstances? Because it wasn't typical remote learning. I have a daughter who went to cyber charter school. It did not look like the last 2 months, right? This was pandemic learning. So what were we able to do for our kids, and what would we want to do moving forward? We need some time. We need our educators to have time to actually have that conversation, using that go slow to go fast mantra, so that they can really be thoughtful about the work that has to happen and involve the community in its broadest sense. I think the communities are the ones that can really address what kids need in a much bigger way. Educators need partners. We got to break down. I think somebody commented about how do we break down the silos. We've got to just see past those walls in a very, very big way. And think about how we can connect with each other. It's that cohesive knowledge, right? I know in the research, it's all about cohesive teacher knowledge, but I would suggest that I think we need to broaden that. It's not just what teachers know about each other's work. It's what we were saying about teachers. We need to know what the kids know, what the kids think, what the kids have to offer. We need to know what the community has to offer. We've got to break down those walls as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my favorite Billy Joel song. We all need to listen to Vienna and slow down, you crazy child, because I mean I think it's almost like beaten into us from the moment we start learning to be an educator till the moment we die, because that's when you stop being an educator, no matter what you do with your life. And you're just, it's that nose to the grindstone, get the job done. You've got to be productive. You've got to be effective. You've got to be efficient. It's such a central part to our culture, at least in my experience in America's schools. That I think this has been an opportunity, this specific issue, by saying, maybe if you just opened the door and look to your right down the hallway, you might have those opportunities for intersections that didn't normally happen before because you were just too busy to leave your room.
Yeah, I want to capitalize on something that Steph said, because I want to shout out to Chicago Public Schools and the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. They've been on many of our sessions, and we've also had some school board members, and we've also had some other extraneous, what we used to think of as ancillary components that are coming to the sessions, because it's about that community and involving that community. And I also want to say, what would we want to do? Thank you for stating that, right? What would we want to do? And it's going to take all of us, and we can do what we want to do. So let's not get stuck in those old ways. And let's invite those collaborators and those thought partners from outside of the community. They can bring such richness and diverse thinking and texture to our design and how we can begin to serve kids differently, because it is going to look different, right? And we're going to need their help, right? When we only have daycare, we don't have, we only go to school 2 days a week, and then how are we going to? So how can we partner with others that traditionally we have not even considered? So this is a call out to all those partners that are out there maybe listening. Contact your schools, help them figure things out together so we can collectively serve our students and meet the need that is out there.
Denise, I'm going to do another call out as more of a call to action. I challenge every leader who's listening to this session and in the work that's been happening the last couple of days, that is your first meeting. So end the school year well and plan that first meeting with those community partners, with your teachers, with your students. And your first meeting is, what have we learned? And what do we want to take forward? Let that be don't come to the table with the answers. Come to the table just excited and hopeful about what we can create together. And if you can do that as your first meeting and then plan with those folks in mind, I think you're going to have a great start.
Yeah,
that makes me thinking about just the power of one question about what if.
What if?
What if? And and saying like, okay, so what we did is off the table. What we used to do is just not an option. Let's just do that for a little bit and give permission to let go of that and kind of just sit back and go, what if? And then begin building from that what if and using, such good implementation practices.
Yes.
Doing course corrections along the way, but this permission to redesign, this permission to create. With Leslie's question about, what about breaking down, silos of content and to better support students? Well, what if we did look at that? Because that's more how we operate in the world and how our students are engaging in the world that we are too. What if we could do that? And we can. And this gives a time for permission to do so and to really use people's strengths to help us get there. Doing a nice inventory of staff's, strengths, what they like doing, what they're interested in doing, what drives them outside of the instructional piece, and begin using the strengths within the collective whole to move an organization forward, but in a way that answers the what if.
And I think that this event is evidence of what can happen when you do that, right? Because Stephen and Janice, you're like you said earlier, you're planners and you've done a tremendous amount of work, and you also took a big risk by putting this together. And Sydney's in the same boat. We're looking at this from a professional development lens. We're presenting the Better Together conference June 29th and 30th. We did the same thing. We were like, we don't need to make any money off of this. We just want to create space for people to have connections. And you just put that broad call out to people, and it's amazing the response that you get. And through some sort of kismet, we have this beautiful through line of wonderful ideas that's coming about, not just from the amazing presenters that we've had, just one right after the other, but it's been such a joy just to sit and watch the chat and to see the conversations that are happening from one person to the next. The thing that will always amaze me about working in education is educators. That is the thing that will always amaze me. If you put 10 teachers in a room, you're going to leave that room with 100 great ideas. And it's ingrained in our spirit to be inventive, to be collaborative, but the system is designed to get the outcomes that it gets, right? And so we gotta break that system down a little bit to make that room for the people to do the invention.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is thinking of just asking some different questions while we're trying to build. So whether it is that we're still in social distancing and figuring out what works and what doesn't, the two questions that we really hit on hard is who's going to be marginalized from this and who's going to benefit? And then how will we mitigate that? And so when we think about the what if and begin building it and begin letting ourselves create, right? So when we have a cognitive space within this pandemic to create, then putting those questions there, getting at the base of asking our system that question to be able to ensure that we are actually changing our policies and practices. I know Jonathan Kozol will say in one of his books, we ask for equity, but we make it look like equity and it's still really not. It's almost like we just changed out the closet. And we don't want this opportunity to go by that we just changed out the closet and we're still doing family goals. But I think putting those questions at the center of the what if and asking it every time we're thinking of, what if we go 2 days? What if we, have this group come in now, this later, and saying, who are we creating this system for, and who are we unintentionally marginalizing within it?
All right, great. And I'm going to put a plug in. Whatever we select, let's implement it well. Because, and I love how you capitalized on that, Amy, because I know with the people in the room here really focus on that, but sometimes quite often we see people choose something that's a great choice, even with a collective agreement, but then we don't really implement it with the intention and as it was intended. And we also don't have a team to champion that implementation along the way so that we can feed that information back. So we can make those real, because we're not gonna, if we plant a flag in the sand, it's in the sand, it's gonna move. But if we have the system feeding back information to us so we can make adjustments, refinements, and we're hearing from those voices, then we can continue to implement and make adjustments and implement and make adjustments so that we get to having significant results, socially significant results for the students that we serve. So if you go forward, please make sure you have an implementation team that you're using. And if you didn't get to see Stephen and I's implementation team presentation, not a plug that is for us, but really it is important to do your work. Like, right. But you want to make sure you implement whatever it is you choose. Make sure you put a team together so that it gets done with intentionality so we get socially significant outcomes.
Well, and just remember too, there's evidence-based practice, but there's also practice-based evidence.
Yeah.
And so, we have new ideas that are surfacing that may not have a lot of evidence behind them, but they're good ideas. Use an implementation team for that as well, and allow them to monitor how well is it working and make those adjustments all along the way so that people are getting what they need to do that right and well, but also you're making those adjustments so that it produces the results that you're hoping that it really does produce.
I'll plug, that's one of those embedded reflective practices. That's one of the conditions for collective efficacy, right? We have to have something in place so that we can keep asking ourselves, is the thing that we wanted to try having the impact we wanted? And if it is, great. And if it's not, let's make another correction.
That's right. That's the whole part, the whole process.
It reminds me when I was a school administrator, when I kind of, you always go back and reflect and go, oops. No, never. But I remember when this really hit home for me about having solid implementation, and the difference with like adaptive and technical leadership was, partway through a school year, we changed the lunch schedule, which, can be quite, we had to because it wasn't working for kids, right? But in doing that, we did a lot of solid implementation. Like there was so much implementation supports before, during, after, so much feedback that was happening, right? Because we can't have I can't even imagine like a lunchroom in chaos. And however, when we changed our math core curriculum, that same level of intentionality was not there.
Yeah, that happens all the time, Amy. It's so sad. And we invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in that curriculum.
And, the idea of that supporting staff to do whatever it is you're going to ask them to do. If you can't figure that out, then take a chill and figure it out first. And for me, that's just such a tangible two pieces that I remember in my, leadership at a building level of, man, I knew this would be chaos, but I didn't do it. But this was also chaos in a different way. Mm-hmm. The immediate impact of the lunch schedule versus the math curriculum, and wishing that I had the knowledge of implementation science then, would have done it better.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a great.
Absolutely. And I mean, we all have a frame for this, right? We all have, every single one of us has written a lesson plan, and we've worked really hard to write that lesson plan and gotten halfway through that lesson plan and gone, well, this isn't working, right? And that's what I think about it from what you said yesterday in your presentation, Stephen and Janice, and Steph, you said this earlier today also, It's really about that ongoing collaborative effort to continue to collect evidence throughout an implementation. Not and there's really not a point where you're saying, okay, we're done, we can check it off the list, right? As long as you're doing it, you're implementing it. And that means that the team has to be deeply engaged in that work as long as that practice, protocol, strategy, lunch plan is happening. You've got to keep engaged in that work. And that's going to be a real opportunity going into the fall.
Well, and to create space for making meaning of the work too. It's not just about assessing whether it's working or not. It's also about those one-shot professional development. I mean, Hattie he talks about all these incredible strategies that have these powerful effect sizes. He also just recently wrote a great article. Well, it's probably about a year old, but a whole piece about it's about doing it right and well. It's not about just adopting the strategy. And the workshop maybe taught everybody about the strategy, but people have to actually spend time together making meaning of what does it mean to me in my context? What does it mean to me in my classroom? How do I do this given these variables? And they need the time and space to do that. And that's what helps build that collective efficacy if they're given that opportunity to dialogue around, what does this mean for me, and how do I make sense of how to do this well and right? So we have to create that space in order for implementation to actually take root.
Kids aren't the only ones who need
to. Say that right, Steph? Am I right?
Absolutely right. I mean, I think about from the design thinking tradition, the idea of rapid prototyping, right? We need the permission to try things out, and knowing that it may not work perfectly the first time, but let's learn from that. We want to start with evidence-based because that gives us the highest probability that it's going to work well. And then we have to make it work in our context, and our context isn't the same as next door, and it isn't the same as down the street. So getting to understand our students and our community and what they need really, really well. I think that's what Amy was really talking. We got to know our kids and how they're best going to operate, and then make the strategy work for them. And the only way we'll learn that is by trying it, right? So rapid prototype, learn from the things that don't work, make those adjustments, keep the kids at the center.
And give people the opportunity to have that exact dialogue, not just own it myself. And it's not just an internal conversation, it's a collective conversation.
Yeah. Grant Wiggins used to say, education is not a solo sport.
Yes.
Right.
As we're talking a little bit about implementation and thinking about equity from our earlier snippets of conversation, as we're looking at progress of implementation of whatever practices we're putting in place, and looking at our student group data over time to ensure that we are having strong enough practices across, and allowing our educators to say, yeah, I didn't implement that with fidelity. Because anytime I've worked with a team and I ask the question, would you implement fidelity? They're like, yes. I was like, I call not true. I call not true because kids had to be absent. Were you absent? And that's in a traditional school, setting. What did you have a fire drill at any point in time? All these components, and saying, we just want to know so that way. Because, the greatest thing that we can fix and the easiest thing is fidelity, right?
Yeah.
Instead of, oh man, we picked the wrong thing. Bummer.
Yeah.
That's a
It
whole
is,
thing.
Yeah, because fidelity can feel constricting, and like you should do this, you should do that. We're shooting on people, and we need to think about how can I help you? What do you need? How can we support you? It's not going well. So if we need to have a paradigm shift around that fidelity, it's like we're monitoring the system so we can help each other. And when we take that fear and that evaluation and constriction, we have to, well, we don't have to, we would advocate that we think through that new paradigm of how's it going? How can I help you? What do you need? So we can get to full implementation, because we all agreed this was the practice we want to do. Because if I've had a voice in selecting it, I'm hand over hand, fist over fist, we're doing this. If it's something I didn't have a voice in, it's a little more difficult conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, our 30-minute conversation that's gone 45 minutes, I'm going to let you have the last last word, Denise. It's been so much fun, but I'm really doing this for your good because you need to go to bed because you've got another long day tomorrow. So thank you all very, very much. This has been as Janice said, an empowering day. Yesterday was an inspiring day. I can't wait till tomorrow. So many wonderful opportunities to continue this conversation and to continue learning. So thank you all very much. Have a great night, and we'll see you in the morning.
Thank you, Stephanie
Thanks,
and Amy.
TJ.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Jay.
Bye.